from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
We are most pleased to have what I would call a festival of music on this program, both this week and next week. We always enjoy doing programs in that area and interviewing some very popular and talented individuals, and then also have them to share their music with us. On these two programs, we're bringing back two guests who were with us a year ago, and they were so popular. Not only did Janelle and I enjoy them, but our audience, that we are bringing them back. I welcome to the program today and again for next week Jim Dalton and Maggie Smith Dalton, from now in Moscow, Idaho. They're from back east, and they've been here in the West for a couple of years, where Jim Dalton recently received his master's degree, and we congratulate you, and we know you're both deeply involved with music in Moscow. I would point out to the audience that Jim Dalton is teaching at the University of Idaho in music, and with the guitar in particular. And Maggie Smith Dalton can be heard on Northwest Public Radio with a program on Sunday mornings from 10:30 until noon, and again at the University of Idaho radio station on Mondays from 4:30 to 6:20. And we've invited our guests to come and be with us for the 2 weeks to deal with two areas. They have so many concerts they do on different subjects, and we have chosen for this week what is called Shakespeare Song Festival, and they will be back next week to talk about and play and sing about music and the movements of the America in the 1960s, and I liked your title of Blowing in the Wind. Yeah. So we have that next week. Again, on behalf of Janelle Burke and our staff, welcome to the program once again.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us back. We're very happy to be here.
And it's always most wonderful to have a regular panelist, Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning today.
Music is a special interest and a special love of mine, and I had the privilege of hearing you a year ago, and it's going to be fun today to talk about that. But so that our viewers can get to know you a little bit better, I have a series of 3 questions. The first one is, how did the two of you get together? The second question has to do with what are your special interests, your field of schooling, your field that you have studied. And then the third one is, how do you go about forming a program like the Shakespeare program? So let's start with, how did the two of you get together?
Well, this is a great story to be telling 2 days before our anniversary, actually. We were both playing in the same club, but on different nights, and had never met. And he was playing a duet with a friend of mine, who I came in after I was finished elsewhere to catch a set, and met Jim that way, and basically first fell in love with his blue eyes and the way he played the guitar. They both kind of had equal billing at that time, as I recall. And we started to play together occasionally, and then we just decided that it was a good enough partnership in every respect to cement it.
And so the two of you are actually married, and,
yes.
and you have been together. What kind of music were you performing when you met?
Well, we were playing the kind of things that went over well in the nightclubs in New Jersey at the time, generally popular music of the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, and show tunes and things like that.
Were you involved in some jazz, too, as well as...
My act was a solo act. I played guitar and sang, and my repertoire was wildly eclectic. So I would sing everything from contemporary pop to Broadway tunes to jazz flavored standards to traditional folk, and really just anything that would give me a tip, as I recall.
But the two of you have had some serious schooling, too,
yes.
in your fields. Let's start with Jim and tell us a little bit about your background in terms of your professional and formal training.
Well, at the time we met, I had a double major, bachelor's degree in composition and classical guitar. And I was teaching at a college in New Jersey at the time, teaching guitar and music theory. And since then, when we came out here, I took a master's degree in composition at the University of Idaho. And my background as far as my playing goes into quite a number of different things. I've done a lot of research into early American blues guitar styles, the styles of the 20s and 30s, and various ethnic styles and historical styles of stringed instrument playing, from Irish music and I'm getting into Hawaiian guitar music now a bit and things like that, and then things going back to the Renaissance lute and historical periods of banjo playing, things like that.
And Maggie, you've been a student too of, I think you're a sociologist, is that correct?
American Studies person. I consider myself, I think the most accurate way to describe me, besides being a singer, is a cultural historian. So what I like to do is to explore not just the what and the where, but the why of the music that I sing. And that's been a lifelong interest that I just began to decide to formally study in the recent decade or so. Since Jim and I have been together, we have found that having that approach to the material that we do is very interesting to the audience. And in particular, we combined a love of history and decided to really sort of concentrate, not to the exclusion of everything else, but focus our attention on American roots music in particular, and how that grew out of the culture and how it reflected the culture back to both the people of the time when the music was new and now as well.
And so you select a theme, and then you begin to develop with that theme, and it's not just the music that you perform for people, but it's a story as to how the music developed and everything about it, a background. So can you help us a little bit with that? How do you go about deciding on a theme and then doing your research and then coming up with a program?
Well, deciding on the theme is actually the most, how can I put this?
Challenging?
Well, I wasn't even going to say challenging. I was going to say that's where the most element of chance comes in. I think it just depends what might strike us at any given time. Or
we do a lot of audience communication. We do ask feedback from audiences. We have mailing lists. When we give programs in the communities that are artist in residency series, we do have vehicles for people to give us an idea of what they liked, what they didn't. And just like anything else, this of course is our art and our work, but it's also our business. So just like any other business, we do tend to do market research. We keep our eye on what people seem to be talking about or interested in. And I'd say over half our programs were developed directly as a result of audience feedback.
Well, I want to let the audience hear what you sound like, so we're going to talk a little bit about Shakespeare later, but perhaps we can go right on to Tony now, and he can let everyone hear what you sound like.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to introduce to the audience is that when we talk about our guest dealing with what they call Shakespeare Song Festival, one of the ways that they advertise this is to indicate that this special program explores Shakespeare's work through his use of music and poetry. Our guests also have commented on the fact that the music offered can range from pieces contemporary to Shakespeare and used in his plays during his time to modern settings of his poetry, prose, and sonnets. And so that is kind of an introduction to what's about to happen. And they've chosen some songs that we're going to be using throughout this 30 minutes. And I want to ask on this particular round of questions I have for you to introduce two numbers that you're going to do. I understand one of them is the last song in the 12th night. And then when you tell us about that and perform, you're going to do one on Kemp's Jig, I believe an instrumental, about one of the players. And so Maggie, would you like to introduce this first number? And I know that our viewers will have a wonderful opportunity to hear the music about the Shakespearean period.
One thing that you need to remember about Shakespeare, that there is some evidence that he was a musician himself. There's lots of in-jokes in his plays about technique, and there's certainly jokes about how singers, I can't sing today, I just have a cough, and that kind of thing, as well as some reference to certain techniques that only a musician would know. And incorporating music into his plays, this is a popular medium, and this is something we'll stress over and over again in the program. A popular medium, and therefore Shakespeare, with his very uncanny ear for popular cadence, would either choose songs that were popular or tunes that were popular and write his own words. That was a very common practice, as we've talked about on this program before, as a matter of fact, with all kinds of music. And one of his favorite ways of either comic relief or exposition of a character or mood setting would be to use music, and he used it very skillfully. Now, this song is called When That I Was and a Little Tiny Boy, and it was the final song in Twelfth Night when the clown, who of course, as in most Shakespeare plays, is the wisest man in the play, stands forth and comments on the entire absurd thing that has just happened. So this song has an absurdist tinge to it. And he talks about going through life and all the things that you learn, and do you really learn anything in the end? It's kind of funny. When that I was and a little tiny boy with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, a foolish thing was but a toy. The rain, it raineth every day with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, it raineth every day. But when I came to man's estate with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, knaves and thieves men shut their gate, for the rain, it raineth every day. Hey-ho, the wind and the rain, it raineth every day. When I came at last to wife, hey-ho, the wind and the rain, by swaggering I could never thrive. The rain, it raineth every day. Hey-ho, the wind and the rain, for the rain, it raineth every day. A great while ago the world begun with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain. That's all when our play is done. We'll strive to please you every day with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain. We'll strive to please you every day.
As always, that's most beautiful and really takes us into the appreciation of the Shakespeare
And you need to know
period.
that everyone would be
Yeah.
singing along with that hey-ho part.
Yes.
It was a rowdy bunch.
Yes, had a lot of fun. Maggie, introduce us to the second number that you're going to do, or is Jim going to
I'm
do
going to
that?
can do
ask
that.
Jim to do that.
This is called Kemp's Jig, and Kemp was one of the players in Shakespeare's company and was most well known today for a big publicity stunt that he pulled. And this was to dance a jig all the way from London to Norwich, and it took him 9 days to do that. Published a book later on called The 9 Days Wonder. He was also known for his incredible humility, too.
Not.
But this is a little tune that actually only takes a few seconds to perform, so I usually play through it at least twice. If this was the tune that Kemp danced the jig to, it would have had to be played an enormous amount of times. But it actually was probably written afterwards and commemorated the publicity stunt.
Thank you very much, Jim. That was most pleasurable. At this time, we shall return to Janelle Burke.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the instrument that you were just playing, Jim. It is a lute, I
Yes.
understand. And can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, what a lute was and what the distinction is between a lute and a guitar? And why were early musicians using lutes?
Well, it's actually a very interesting story. The lute came into Europe by way of by way of the Middle East. It actually came from Middle Eastern musicians Two different ways. One was it was brought back to Europe after the Crusades, and the other was through the Moorish occupation of Spain, which was from the 8th century until the end of the 15th century. And it was really contemporary with the guitar, and the lute was extremely popular over all of Europe by the middle of the Renaissance. And when Spain finally united under Ferdinand and Isabella and pushed the Moors out in 1492, the Spanish stopped using the lute because it symbolized the Moors to them and the occupation. And they turned then to the guitar and the ancestors of the guitar, basically to have an instrument that was similar but didn't have the distinctive shape of the lute and things like that. Then it died out, I guess, in the late 17th century, mostly because it had too many strings. They kept adding them every few years. This one has 19, is the type of about the late Elizabethan period. Some of the later ones had as many as 10 more strings on them.
And that would create a great problem, probably tuning-wise,
Yes.
and particularly given the quality that they probably had to work with at that
Exactly. Oh, the strings were terrible then. They're not always a whole lot better now, but they were really awful then. And there was a famous quote from Matheson, who was a contemporary of Bach's, and he said, if a lute player lives to be 80 years old, he undoubtedly spends 40 years of his life tuning. And we usually say in the other 40 years playing out of tune. But
Well, Maggie, tell me a little bit about how you choose some songs that have to do with Shakespeare. How do you find the ones that you think people would want to hear that have some particular interest to them?
Well, naturally, first of all, people would be interested in hearing the music as Shakespeare's contemporaries would have heard, and there are any number of scholarly sources for that. They're extant, they're fairly easy to get, as a matter of fact.
they're published.
Published, right. When you do some research into the folk tunes that would have been out and about in the popular imagination of the time, you get a real sense of the kind of music that was in the air. And as I said, Shakespeare was a great popularizer, so he would have used that kind of music. And from studying history and knowing the time period well, you make educated guesses. Then, of course, with the modern adaptations that you find, you choose it like you would any other piece of music for the beauty of the composition, how it fits the mood of the piece, and so forth and so on as well, just as any other aesthetic judgment would be made. And then, of course, when you put the program together, you try to balance it. What we like to do with audiences is give you a sense of the whole thing, not just focus narrowly on this one little topic, but give you a sense of what life was like, because we all live life now in many different directions, and it was no different then. So you try to bring in all different pieces of the time period for folks. So you walk away with a good sense of the time period as well as specific information.
Now, one thing at that time, they were not necessarily using meter like we use meter today. Isn't that correct? They did have fluctuating meters, and so sometimes when we hear these catchy tunes, that's a part of what makes them catchy. Do either one of you want to talk about that a little bit more? I'm talking about counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
And the
Right,
variations like in some of these pop songs as well.
Sure. Some of them, they actually went back and forth between what we would consider 2 and 3, and it was a very typical Elizabethan kind of thing to do. And actually even more so in some of the Spanish music of the period. And that has even survived to today in Spanish music.
It makes the tune very catchy.
It does. It does. It doesn't let you settle into anything too strict without throwing a little something else at you.
Something else that's fascinating when you sing these songs is there's almost always double and triple entendres and puns and inside jokes. Shakespeare was, if anything else, he was very playful with the language and invented quite a lot. Some estimations of his vocabulary range around 30,000 words. Most people's everyday vocabulary is somewhere around 15. So that gives you a sense of it. And he actually invented a few new words, or he put words together in different ways. And this was something that was very prevalent in the society of his time. It wasn't unique to him. He just did it extremely well, the way Mozart did his music as the epitome of all the forms that had come before him. So when you talk about meter and rhythm too, you also have to look at the words and how those are played with, because that's a really fun part of doing this kind of music.
You just did a transition here that's important to us. I know that you have a number that you're going to do from Queen Elizabeth I's court, and Jim had just referred to that in his last comments. Would you please introduce this one for us?
Sure. This is called Now, Oh Now, I Needs Must Part. And to give you the very briefest of descriptions of what was going on, Queen Elizabeth basically played games with every eligible and not so eligible male in Europe, because she was quite determined not to get married for many reasons, many of them very good ones. But as a queen, she had to at least pretend to want to. So what she did was she flirted with everybody and had protracted negotiations with folks. One of those negotiations, one of the last ones that she was involved in, lasted something like 8 years, I forget, but it was a long time, with the younger son of the Catherine de Medicis, one of her younger sons, who she called fondly, affectionately, her frog. And when she finally booted him back to France, she wrote him this ridiculous letter that said, "I wish I could see my frog hopping across the channel again." So it gives you an idea of what goes on. So there's an internal joke in this song. This song is called Now, Oh Now, I Needs Must Part. It's a song from the courtly music of the time, and it's about the heart-rending feeling that her suitor had leaving her. But there's also an internal joke, and that's embedded in the rhythm.
Right, it's this little leaping rhythm in the lute part, and the instrumental version of this song is called The Frog's Galliard.
So listen for the frog leaping across the channel in this song. No, no, I needs must part, parting no absent morn, absence can no joy impart, joy once fled could not return. While I live, I needs must love, love lives not when hope is gone. Now at last despair doth prove, love divided, love of none. Sad despair doth drive me hence, this despair unkindness sends. If that parting be offense, it is she which that offends. Dear, if I do not return, love and I shall die together, for my absence never known, whom you might enjoy at end. Part we must, oh now I die I do to part with you. In despair doth cause to lie, who both lived and dieth through. Sad despair doth drive me hence, this despair unkindness sends. If that parting be offense, it is she which that offends.
We just need a large audience to applaud such a wonderful performance.
Thanks.
Maggie, you have another number that you're going to introduce to us again from this history that we're talking about concerning the Shakespearean period.
A popular song of the day.
Yes.
One thing that you need to realize when you're doing this music is that it is anything but staid, and it was not meant to be done in a dusty old library for only the elite. The theater that Shakespeare was a part of was a very big part of a very thriving, popular art form, and audiences were anything but sedate. They were rowdy. So this song, Fine Knacks for Ladies, of which we're going to do one verse, kind of alludes to the fact that everything's in the marketplace, okay? But it also has a double meaning, again. Ostensibly, it's about someone who's gone out with their pack, and they're plying their wares in the marketplace. But if you listen to the words, they're talking about, don't read a book by its cover. There are gems beneath this commercial exterior. So I think that fits Shakespeare very well. Fine mats for ladies, cheap, choice, frame, and new. Good penny words, but money cannot move. I keep a fair, but for the fair to view. A tailor may be liberal of love. Oh, all my ways may trash, but that is true. The heart is true. The heart is true. Oh, all my ways may trash, but that is true. The heart is true. The heart is true.
Time has just been flying by, we're enjoying ourselves, and we're running short on time, so we're going to go into the fifth number that you have, which is a modern connection to the Shakespearean work, and have you to introduce that before we're out of time.
Well, one of the things that we like to stress is that Shakespeare lives on, and it's contemporary to your life and continually is renewed. One of the ways you see this, of course, is through the music, which continues to be written. You can just look at the recent films by Kenneth Branagh to know that. This is called Tell Me Where Is Fancy Bred, and it takes place in the Merchant of Venice, where a very big decision is being made. If the young man chooses the wrong casket, if he chooses the right one, he gets the gal. So it's a moment of decision. Tell Me Where Is Fancy Bred by Elliott Carter.
Yes, Elliott Carter is a still living American composer from Maine, and this was written by him in 1938.
Tell me where is fancy bred, or in the heart, or in the head. How begot, how nourished,
Our guest will be with us again next week. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.